My stepfather called me nothing but a burden. Turns out I'd been a stolen heiress for 32 years. Okay, prepare yourself. Because this isn't just a story. It's the moment my entire world exploded, and I realized every single thing I thought I knew about myself was a lie. What if the person you trusted most was actually the architect of your own personal prison? That clerk's whisper hit me harder than any scream I'd ever heard. I was standing there in the federal building in Chicago, gripping a crumpled eviction notice in my hand. $25, my last $25, burning a hole in my pocket. I wasn't there for vacation, believe me. I was desperate.
A job. Any job.
A janitor position. My last shot at keeping my head above water. But as she scanned my file, the sterile hum of the office air was ripped open. A violent, pulsing red. A silent alarm strobe began to spin on the wall, bathing everything in this horrific, bloody glow. 2 armed guards. Suddenly, they were there, hands hovering over holsters. Lethal intent. The clerk, her face drained of color, shaking hands. "Ma'am," she breathed, barely a sound. "This social security number, it belongs to a child who died in 1991. My heart became a trapped bird. My mind? It went cold, completely numb. Just as the elevator dinged, their tension snapped. And out stepped a man in a tailored black suit. He moved like he owned the air, walking through the armed perimeter, past the terrified clerk. He looked straight at me. His eyes. They held a recognition that terrified me more than the Glock 17s now pointed near my chest. He stopped 2 feet away. And then he whispered 3 words. 3 words that incinerated my entire reality. "Welcome back, Elenina." He didn't read me my rights. Not a single one. Instead, he led me into a soundproof office. It smelled of expensive espresso beans and aged leather. A world I'd only ever seen through the windows of the houses I cleaned. He poured me ice water. The cubes rattled. The only sound. I took a sip, but the rich coffee scent made my stomach churn. My signature scent for 14 years? Industrial-grade bleach. And the damp, stagnant air of the laundry room where I slept. This man, Agent Bradley, slid a thick manila folder across a mahogany desk. He opened it. A digital rendering. An age progression photo. A young woman. The rapid DNA test, he said, his voice quiet, against the 1991 cold case database. Came back 10 minutes ago. It's a 99.9% match, Elenina. You aren't just a resemblance. You are a biological certainty. She had my jawline, my exact nose, my eyes. But she didn't look like she spent her nights calculating how to survive on minimum wage. She looked loved. Your name is Elenina Hayes, Bradley continued, soft. You are the sole heir to a Silicon Valley real estate and tech empire. $400 million. You weren't abandoned. You weren't a mistake. You were kidnapped from a park in 1991. Kidnapped. That word.
It should have broken me.
The walls should have closed in. But instead, it felt like a balance sheet finally being reconciled. All those years.
Gary.
My stepfather. The disgust in his eyes. Calling me a burden. A leech. It all made sickening sense. He wasn't an unloving guardian. He was a warden. Guarding a crime scene. He hadn't kept me out of the goodness of his heart. He'd used my stolen identity as a subscription to a life he didn't earn. With me footing the bill. In blood and sweat. I didn't cry. I didn't ask for a hug. I looked Bradley in the eye. And felt the first surge of clinical, needle-sharp clarity. This wasn't about a missing child anymore. This was a hostile takeover. Gary had spent 14 years overdrafting on my compassion, believing I was too broken to ever check the ledger. He was wrong. The victim he thought he'd groomed into silence was dead. The witness was awake. And I didn't want an apology. I wanted an accounting of every cent, every minute, every breath he had stolen from me. What happens next? I asked. My voice
steady,
like a judge's gavel. In my mind, the Chicago skyline vanished, replaced by the damp, gray walls of Gary's laundry room. my designated space. He hadn't even given me the dignity of my real name. He called me June, a placeholder for the life he was slowly erasing. I remembered watching them through the dining room's bay window.
Gary.
His biological daughter, Kayla, under the warm, golden glow of the chandelier, cutting into thick, bleeding steaks. Steaks that cost more than I made in a week. The clink of crystal glasses. A sound that represented a world I was told I didn't deserve to touch.
I was always on the other side of that glass.
Clutching a cold sandwich, made from the heel of a bread loaf. When I dared to knock on the pane, begging for a moment of warmth, Gary would open the door just enough to loom over me like a shadow. "Steak is for people who contribute, June," he'd say. His voice, a smooth, self-righteous poison. "You're lucky I even keep a roof over your head. You should be on your knees thanking me for the scraps." For so long, I believed him. I carried that perceived debt like a physical stone in my chest, believing I was a mistake, that I needed to apologize for existing. But sitting across from Agent Bradley, that invisible chain Gary had wrapped around my mind finally snapped. It wasn't charity. It was a tactical investment. Gary hadn't been raising a stepdaughter. He'd been grooming a witness to be grateful for her own prison. This was the invisible chain of the survivor, a psychological cage, where the warden convinces the prisoner the walls are a gift. Gary needed me broken, so I wouldn't ask questions about why my face didn't match the names on the documents he kept locked away. He needed me desperate, so I would never have the confidence to look at my own birth certificate. He was an identity trafficker. He'd turned my stolen life into a $400 million laundering scheme. Gary didn't just steal my name. He used my poverty as a human shield. He knew that a cleaning lady, living in a laundry room, was the perfect hiding spot for a $400 million paper trail. If I had looked like an Heiress, the world would have started asking questions he couldn't answer. He kept me starving, to keep his empire invisible. My existence as June the Burden was the camouflage he used to hide Elenina the Haze. Every time he called me worthless, it was a move to protect his profit margin. He didn't hate me because I was unlovable. He hated me because I was a crime scene. Walking through his hallways, I rubbed my wrists, the skin still sensitive, from the weight of the life I'd been forced to carry. Gary had overdrafted on my silence for over a decade. But he forgot one thing about accounting. Eventually, the books have to balance. This wasn't a family drama anymore. It was a hostile audit. And by the time I was finished, I was going to make sure Gary realized that the mistake he had been hiding was the one person who was going to take everything he had built on my blood. The door to that soundproof office didn't just open. It exploded inward. A violence that shattered the silence. I didn't even have time to scream. 2 uniformed deputies stormed the room, hands on their weapons.
Practiced.
Lethal. And striding in behind them, walking through a federal perimeter like it was his own living room.
Gary.
He wasn't wearing the stained flannel shirts I knew. He was in an expensive, perfectly tailored wool suit, gleaming under the sterile lights.
He didn't look at Agent Bradley.
He looked straight at me. And his eyes? Not the anger I expected. They were dead.
Cold.
"Step away from the suspect," he barked. His voice echoed off the glass walls, like a gavel. Bradley stood his ground, placing his body between me and the deputies. "This is a federal investigation, Gary," Bradley said, his voice dangerous. "You have no jurisdiction here." But Gary didn't flinch. As a former prosecutor, he knew exactly where the cracks in the system were hidden. He'd manipulated old connections, bypassed security, waiving an emergency guardianship order, claiming I was a mentally unstable ward who'd gone rogue. He wasn't just there as a father. He was weaponizing a local legal technicality to invade a federal stronghold. Betting his status would intimidate everyone. He slapped a folded piece of paper onto the mahogany desk. A sickening thud. "I have a warrant," Gary sneered. "Signed by a county judge 15 minutes ago. Grand larceny. Felony charges." He pointed a finger at me, the same finger that had poked my chest 1,000 times, telling me I was a mistake. That woman stole $120,000 worth of legacy bonds from my bedroom, he said, before she fled this morning. I'm taking her into custody. That's a lie. I screamed. My clinical clarity
Gone.
eclipsed by raw indignation. I haven't been to your house in years. But Gary only smirked.
Cold. Calculated. He'd planned this.
Long before I walked into this building. He nodded to his deputies. Cuff her. A deputy grabbed my arm, twisted it behind my back. Enough force to make my shoulder pop. I cried out, pain blinding me. For a second. But I didn't beg. I watched Bradley, looking for the savior he promised to be. I saw the calculation in his eyes as Gary stepped in close, chest to chest with the federal agent. Careful, agent, Gary whispered, dripping with a smooth, legislative threat. This is a state crime. Exigent circumstances. Unless you want to obstruct a felony arrest on the record, you'll step aside. Bradley hesitated. He knew. Technically, a local felony warrant could pull me out. If Gary claimed I was a flight risk, Gary was weaponizing the very bureaucracy Bradley served. The cold steel of the handcuffs bit into my wrists. The click of the lock. Like a gunshot. In the quiet office, Gary grabbed my arm, his grip bruising the muscle. He leaned in close, his breath hot, against my ear. His voice, a whisper meant only for me. I told you never to dig, Elenina, he hissed. I told you to leave it alone. Now you're going to die in a holding cell. You'll hang yourself with a bedsheet before your rich parents even touch the tarmac. Blood drained from my body. But I didn't collapse. I realized then. Gary wasn't taking me to jail, to book me. He was taking me to a private execution. Our history wasn't a family bond. It was a bad debt. Gary was trying to write off, permanently. He needed me to be a burden one last time. A body to be disposed of. So his $400 million fraud could stay buried. Move, Gary shouted, jerking me toward the door. As the deputies began to drag me toward the elevator, I felt it. The familiar weight of the June persona. Trying to take over. The part of me trained to be a quiet, compliant prisoner. But that girl was gone. Gary had spent 14 years making me invisible. But today, I was going to be the most visible thing in his entire world. The hallway stretched out. A sterile tunnel. Fluorescent lights blurring. Gary's hand, a vice on my bicep, digging into tender flesh. That grip. I knew it. But I didn't struggle. I didn't pull away. Instead, I did something Gary didn't expect. I went completely limp. I dropped my entire body weight to the floor. In a single, sudden motion. It's a trick you learn. When you're forced to move heavy furniture alone. Dead weight. Impossible to move gracefully. The sudden drop caught the deputy off guard. His grip slipped. Boots skidding on polished linoleum. We jerked to a halt. 10 feet from the elevator bank. Get up. Gary snarled. Yanking on my arm. Desperate. Purple-faced rage. Stop making a scene. I didn't get up. I planted my heels. And slowly straightened my spine. Pulling against the handcuffs. Until the steel chain was taut. Biting into my skin. I turned my head. Looked directly into Gary's eyes. For the first time in 14 years, I didn't flinch. I didn't look down. I let him see exactly what he had created. The victim was gone. The witness was awake. Bradley,
I yelled.
My voice didn't crack. It didn't plea. It was an order. Check the timestamp. Look at the warrant he signed. Gary's face. From rage to a flicker of genuine, frantic terror. Shut her up, he barked at the deputies. Get her in the elevator.
Now.
But it was too late. Bradley didn't slow down. He didn't ask questions. He threw his body weight against the elevator doors, just as they were sliding shut, forcing them back open with a screech of grinding metal. 2 uniformed Federal Protective Service officers materialized from the security checkpoint, hands on their weapons, blocking the exit. Hold it, Bradley barked. Not the calm tone he'd used in the office. This was the voice of a man who commanded federal task forces. Nobody moves. This is federal territory. I am a former prosecutor and a family guardian executing a lawful arrest. Gary roared, sweat beading on his forehead. Let me see the warrant, Bradley demanded, holding out his hand. He didn't ask. He waited. Gary clutched the paper to his chest. For a split second, the move of a poker player, hiding a losing hand. Then, realizing 3 federal guns were pointed in his general direction, he shoved the crumpled paper at Bradley. Read it and weep, Agent. Grand larceny. Signed at 8 a.m. sharp. This morning. Bradley snapped the paper open, scanned it once, looked up at the digital clock above the security desk, then the security monitors behind the guard station. A cold, terrifying calm settled over him. You're sloppy, Gary, Bradley said, his voice a whisper, like ice. He turned the paper around so the deputies could see it. This warrant was signed at 8 o'clock sharp. But my building's cameras logged Hayes entering through the north metal detectors at 7:45 a.m. The lobby went dead silent. She's been in federal custody since she walked in, Bradley said, stepping closer to Gary, invading his space. Unless she can teleport, she couldn't have stolen $120,000 worth of bonds from your house at 8 o'clock if she was standing in my lobby 15 minutes earlier. The deputies holding me loosened their grip, as if my skin had turned to fire. They looked at each other, then at Gary. They realized they weren't executing a legal arrest. They were accomplices
To a kidnapping.
in progress. Gary stood alone, in the center of the circle, his authority evaporating, like mist in a furnace. His rented power had just run out of credit. Release her now, Bradley ordered, his voice echoing with the weight of federal command. I scrambled backward, across the polished floor, putting distance between myself and the man who had stolen my life for 31 years. Gary's face was a mask of purple, pulsating rage. Realizing he couldn't talk his way out of this, he finally broke. His eyes were bloodshot, his facade of the sophisticated prosecutor shattering into pure manic desperation. He didn't care about federal cameras or armed guards anymore. He was a man watching a $400 million empire vanish, and he was ready to burn everything down with him. I'm not leaving without her, Gary screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. His hand flew to his belt. He ripped his taser from its holster, yellow plastic gleaming under the lobby lights. He leveled it at Bradley. Back off, he yelled. I am taking custody of this suspect. He was holding a federal agent at gunpoint. In a federal building. Gary knew it was over. He was just a cornered animal, trying to survive the next 5 minutes. The guards reacted instantly. 3 Glock 17s snapped up, in perfect synchronization, barrels trained directly on Gary's chest. Drop the weapon, Bradley ordered.
Now.
For a moment, it looked like Gary might force them to shoot him. Then, the madness drained from his eyes, replaced by the hollow realization of a man who had lost his leverage. He tossed the taser onto the marble floor and slowly raised his hands. Fine, Gary sneered, salvaging his dignity. He reached into his jacket. The guards tensed, but he pulled out a crumpled document. You caught me, Gary said lightly. The warrant was fake. I knew about the kidnapping. I helped cover it up. I kept you. I hid you. I stole your life. Bradley stepped forward, with the handcuffs, but Gary just laughed. A dry, rattling sound. No, I'm not under arrest, Gary said. Check the calendar. The kidnapping happened in 1991. The statute of limitations for kidnapping and fraud expired in 2011. The lobby went dead silent. You can't touch me. I walk. And legally, you're still incompetent. I control your assets. You're right about the statute, Bradley said, his voice dropping to a terrifying calm. That stopped Gary mid-step. But you forgot one rule. Bradley lifted a thick file from the desk. The constructive trust doctrine. He dropped the file onto the counter, with a thud, like a coffin lid closing. You don't own property obtained through fraud, Gary. In the eyes of the law, you simply hold it in trust for the victim. We traced the initial ransom money you laundered. Every social security benefit you illegally claimed in her name. While she scrubbed floors in your laundry room, Bradley continued, his voice cold. You were cashing checks signed by a ghost. That's my money, Gary snapped, his composure shattering. No, I said, stepping into his space, my voice cold and lethal. You just managed it for me. You were the silent investor in my misery. But the debt has been called in. Bradley's voice cut through the air, like a blade. Civil fraud doesn't expire when the victim was a minor. Your $400 million tech empire. Every cent of it belongs to Elenina. Your assets are frozen. Your house is seized. Your life is no longer your own. Gary recoiled, his face pale, terrified. He was afraid of being nobody. He had spent 30 years building an empire on a foundation of stolen air. This was the illusion of power, the belief that a castle built on sand is permanent because the walls are gilded. Gary's status was a rented costume, paid for with a child's life. But wealth isn't just about what you have. It's about the foundation beneath it. Gary never was a powerful man. He was just a renter of a stolen soul. And once the truth arrived, his status didn't just break. It evaporated. But I'm the prosecutor, Gary screamed, his voice shrill. You laundered money and filed false federal taxes for decades, Bradley cut in. Those clocks are still running, and they're counting down to zero. Right now. The federal guards moved in. With purpose. Gary screamed as the handcuffs finally snapped shut. I leaned in. My voice, a whisper he would never forget. You were right about one thing, Gary. It's expensive to keep a mistake.
And today?
You're the one paying the bill. Gary's screams faded as the elevator doors hissed shut, leaving the lobby in a sudden, ringing silence. Agent Bradley slid a single piece of paper toward me. The asset transfer authorization. My hand, perfectly steady, as I picked up the pen. For decades, I had been the silent investor in Gary's version of family. A subscription I never agreed to.
Now?
The contract was void. I signed my name. Not June the Burden, but Elenina Hayes.
The heir.
Sell it all, I told Bradley, sliding the paper back. I didn't want the luxury Silicon Valley estate, or the high-rise offices built on the interest of my misery. I liquidated every asset, every account, every cent Gary had laundered through my life. I took that $400 million and founded the Elenina Hayes National Registry for Missing Children. I wanted to ensure that every stolen treasure had a way back home. This wasn't revenge. It was an accounting of the soul. The heavy glass doors of the federal building swung open, and the Chicago wind. It was eclipsed by a sudden, blinding warmth. Sunlight flooded the lobby. Two figures rushed in, their faces aged by 31 years of waiting and hoping. I didn't need the renderings or the files. I felt the connection in my bones. Elenina, the woman whispered, her voice breaking into 1,000 pieces of joy. They held me like they would never let go. And for the first time in my life, the ground beneath me didn't feel like it was about to disappear. I've come to realize something profound. We're often taught that loyalty to family is a debt we can never repay. But as I discovered, sometimes that perceived debt is just a weapon, used by wardens to keep you in a prison of your own gratitude. Gary spent years trying to convince me I was unlovable, so I would never look for my own light. He needed me to believe I was a mistake, so I wouldn't realize I was the evidence. If you find yourself in a similar situation, please remember this. Your value isn't something someone else grants you. It's not a label you have to earn from people who only see you as useful. You don't have to stay small to fit into someone else's shadow. Forgiveness isn't always for the other person. Sometimes, it's the only way to set yourself free from the labels they tried to tattoo onto your heart. You aren't broken, and you aren't a burden. You are a treasure that was hidden, waiting for the courage to finally see yourself. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of your own strength, hit that share button. We need to reach the ones who are still waiting for their own light to break through the dark. And tell me, have you ever felt trapped by someone else's definition of you? What finally helped you break free? I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to join our community of survivors. We'll see you in the next one.